23rd of March, 1918, Paris. Friday morning began as usual. Residents hurried to work, merchants opened their shops, and the streets buzzed with familiar activity. Suddenly, at 7:16 in the morning, a deafening explosion rang out. At the Republic Square, in the very heart of the French capital, a column of flame and smoke rose up. People scattered in panic in all directions, not understanding what had happened. 20 minutes later, a new explosion shook another district of the city, then another and another. Shells fell at intervals of approximately 15 to 20 minutes, sowing chaos and terror among Parisians. The French command was in complete confusion about where the bombardment was coming from. German positions were located more than 100 kilometers from the capital, and the range of the most powerful guns of that time did not exceed 30 kilometers. It was a riddle that drove military strategists to despair. Sound detection stations remained silent. They registered no gunfire. Reconnaissance aircraft detected no new enemy batteries. The impression arose that shells fell from the sky of their own accord, as if sent by some demonic force. Meanwhile, 120 kilometers from Paris, in a forested area near the small town of Crépy, something incredible was happening. Among the trees lay hidden a monstrous structure, a cannon 34 meters long mounted on a massive railway platform. Its barrel was so long that it sagged under its own weight of 138 tons, and German engineers had to support it with steel cables like the mast of a giant ship. This was the Paris gun, the secret weapon of Kaiser Wilhelm II, the fruit of many years of work by engineers of the Krupp Company. The history of this monster began in 1914, when German command set the designers what seemed an impossible task. Create a gun capable of bombarding Paris from a distance exceeding 100 kilometers. The goal was less military than psychological, to break the spirit of the French and show them that even their capital was not safe. Krupp engineers set about their calculations and quickly understood the scale of the problem. To achieve such a range required a barrel of unprecedented length of at least 34 meters. At that time, technology did not allow casting a solid barrel of such dimensions. The solution turned out to be unexpected. Use worn-out barrels of naval guns with a caliber of 380 millimeters from battleships known as Long Macs. These barrels were enlarged from the inside, and then special rifled sleeves were inserted to reduce the caliber to 210 millimeters. The construction turned out to be composite, but it was precisely this that allowed achieving the required length. However, new problems arose one after another. The barrel, weighing over 100 tons, sagged in the middle like a stretched rope. German engineers built special support structures with additional cables, converting the cannon into a bizarre construction resembling a lifting crane. After each shot, the barrel vibrated like a giant tuning fork for 2 to 3 minutes, and the crew had to wait until the vibrations stopped. Moreover, after shooting, the barrel was removed by powerful cranes and straightened since it deformed from heat and vibrations. But the most surprising characteristic of the Paris gun was that it literally devoured itself. The incandescent gases from the explosion of a powder charge weighing 196 kilograms and the friction of a projectile weighing 120 kilograms so wore away the barrel from the inside that its diameter increased with each shot. If immediately after manufacture the caliber was exactly 210 millimeters, then after several dozen shots it expanded to 214. German armorers found a brilliant solution. They numbered all the shells and manufactured them with gradually increasing diameter. The first shell had a diameter of 210 millimeters, the second was slightly thicker, the third even thicker, and so on. Shots were fired strictly by number, otherwise the shell either would not fit in the barrel or would rattle in it like a pea in a tube. Each barrel withstood only from 65 to 68 shots, after which it became unusable. During the entire existence of the project, the Germans manufactured 7 barrels each, of which cost incredible sums of money and required the most complex machining. The replacement of a worn-out barrel became a true engineering operation using special cranes and took several days. The entire machine, weighing 256 tons, was placed on a specially constructed railway platform that allowed moving the gun on rails and changing positions. The procedure for preparing for each shot resembled a complex scientific experiment. Specialists examined the barrel from the inside with extreme care, using mirrors and flashlights, checking every millimeter of the surface for cracks and deformations. Then came the turn of the ballistics experts. They received fresh meteorological reports and calculated the projectile's flight trajectory, taking into account wind direction and strength at various altitudes, the temperature of the air humidity, and atmospheric pressure. The slightest error in calculations could result in a miss of several kilometers. The projectile was made from especially tough steel capable of withstanding monstrous accelerations when fired in the barrel. Yet it contained only 15 kilograms of explosive substance. The rest went to a strong body necessary to survive the journey into the stratosphere. When everything was ready, a shot rang out, and the incredible journey of the projectile began. After leaving the barrel at a speed of more than 1.5 kilometers per second, it rushed skyward along an almost vertical trajectory. After 20 seconds, the projectile reached a height of 20 kilometers, piercing the troposphere and entering the stratosphere. Another minute later, it reached the peak of its trajectory 40 kilometers above the Earth. At such an altitude, there was practically no air. Temperature dropped to -50 degrees, and the projectile froze for a moment in weightlessness before beginning to fall. Then it re-entered the dense layers of the atmosphere, heating up from friction to several hundred degrees, and crashed down upon Paris. The total flight time was about 3 minutes, during which the projectile covered a distance of 120 kilometers. The accuracy of such shooting was extremely low. The Germans could only hit targets the size of a large city. The dispersion of shells reached several kilometers. This was precisely why the Paris gun could not be used against specific military targets like barracks depots or headquarters. It was a weapon of terror intended exclusively for psychological impact on the civilian population. Each shell fell in a random location in the city, making the bombardments even more frightening. It was impossible to predict where the next explosion would occur. Someone could be calmly drinking their morning coffee in a cafe, and a minute later the neighboring building would become a pile of rubble. The French government found itself in a desperate position. The population of Paris was gripped by panic. People did not understand where death was coming from and how to protect themselves against it. A massive evacuation from the capital began. Thousands of families abandoned their homes, clogging roads with carts full of belongings. Production in factories shut down, trade ceased, and city life became paralyzed. This was exactly what the Germans wanted to achieve. Not the physical destruction of the city, but the moral collapse of its inhabitants. During the entire bombardment of Paris, 303 shells were fired, 256 people died. Another 620 were wounded. From a military perspective, these figures were negligible. During one day of a major battle on the front, tens of thousands of soldiers died. But the psychological effect was enormous. The French command desperately searched for a solution. All attempts to locate the gun using sound detection stations failed. They simply could not register a shot at such a distance. Reconnaissance aircraft combed through German rear areas, but discovered nothing suspicious. The cannon was skillfully camouflaged in the forest, and its position was constantly protected by smoke screens during firing. Generals demanded that intelligence find this cursed gun at any cost. A desperate decision was made to land agents behind the front lines on German-controlled territory. The first aircraft, with 2 scouts aboard, circled over German positions, searching for a suitable landing place, but failed to land and was forced to return. The second aircraft was shot down by German anti-aircraft artillery, and the agents died. The French were losing people and time while shells continued to fall on the capital with frightening regularity. Finally, one French agent operating in Germany managed to obtain information about the location of the secret gun. The data was transmitted through secret channels to Paris, and French command immediately ordered artillery to deliver a massive strike on the specified coordinates. For 3 days, French batteries methodically bombarded a section of terrain, firing thousands of shells and plowing up the earth in that area. Artillerymen worked day and night, expending a colossal amount of ammunition in hopes of destroying the hated gun. However, when the smoke cleared, it turned out that the agent had made a mistake or had been misinformed by German counterintelligence. The specified point was 5 miles from the actual location of the Paris gun. The French had wasted enormous resources, and the German gun continued its sinister work unscathed. German command understood perfectly well that sooner or later the French would calculate the gun's position, so it developed an ingenious system of camouflage and misinformation. Around the Paris gun, approximately 30 ordinary artillery batteries of various calibers were deployed. All these batteries received the strictest order to open fire exclusively at the moment when the main gun fired. The synchronization was perfect. In the second the Paris gun fired, dozens of other guns roared across the entire sector of the front. The sound wave from numerous simultaneous shots created acoustic chaos in which French sound detection stations simply could not isolate a single source. Operators registered dozens of batteries firing simultaneously, but determining which one was the supergun was absolutely impossible. In addition to acoustic camouflage, the Germans also used visual camouflage. The gun's position was surrounded by tall trees and camouflage netting. During firing, special teams created smoke screens in several places, at once concealing the muzzle flash and hampering visual reconnaissance. The railway tracks to the firing position were carefully camouflaged as ordinary forest roads. Even German soldiers from neighboring units did not know of the supergun's existence just a few kilometers away. The secrecy was absolute. The battery was guarded by specially selected units whose personnel signed a non-disclosure agreement under threat of execution. Curious people were driven away under the pretext of ammunition storage or command post. Access to the zone was strictly forbidden. Maintaining the Paris gun required enormous effort. The crew consisted of highly qualified specialists, artillerymen, mechanics, ballistics, experts, meteorologists. Each shot was an event requiring an hour of preparation. First, meteorologists received data from several stations and compiled a weather forecast for various altitudes up to 40 kilometers. Then, ballistics experts performed the most complex calculations using logarithmic rulers and tables. Mechanics inspected all parts of the gun, checked the tension of support cables, and lubricated aiming mechanisms. A separate group was responsible for preparing the projectile and powder charge. They were delivered from a protected storage facility, inspected for damage. The projectile number was checked to avoid mixing up the sequence. Loading became a complex operation because of the enormous weight of the ammunition. The projectile, weighing 120 kilograms, was lifted by a special winch and carefully inserted into the breech of the barrel. The slightest damage to the rifling could lead to catastrophe. The projectile could get stuck in the barrel or burst inside it. The projectile was followed by a powder charge weighing 196 kilograms packed in several silk cartridges. Then the breech was locked with a massive breech block whose closing required the effort of several men. After this, the battery commander personally checked all preparations, compared the calculations, and only then gave the order to fire. The gunner pulled the trigger cord, a deafening roar sounded, and flames several meters long burst from the muzzle. The entire platform shuddered from the recoil. The ground trembled within a radius of hundreds of meters, and the barrel began its 2 to 3 minute vibrations like a giant pendulum. After every 20 to 30 shots, the barrel required careful cleaning. Inside it, a thick layer of carbon and residue from the copper jackets of the projectiles accumulated. Special cleaning crews spent hours in the barrel, scraping away deposits with metal brushes and wiping the surface with special compounds. It was dirty and dangerous work. Inside the barrel, unbearable heat from residual warmth prevailed, and toxic powder gases ate away at the lungs. Many of these men suffered chronic poisoning and respiratory diseases, but German command ruthlessly drove the crews to work. The gun had to fire on schedule no matter what. The effectiveness of the Paris gun from a military standpoint aroused serious doubts even among the Germans themselves. Each shell cost fabulous sums of money. Its manufacture required high-quality steel and the most precise machining. The powder charge, weighing almost 200 kilograms, could have supplied a normal artillery battery with ammunition for an entire day. The barrel's wear after approximately 60 shots meant that a new one had to be manufactured, which cost a sum comparable to the price of a small warship. Maintaining the enormous crew of highly qualified specialists, guarding the position with an entire company of soldiers, constant camouflage and relocation. All this required colossal resources that could have been used much more effectively on the front. German generals from the artillery administration calculated that for the money spent creating and operating the Paris gun, several dozen ordinary heavy batteries could have been built capable of inflicting incomparably greater damage on the enemy. 303 fired shells, 256 dead, and 620 wounded. The statistics looked depressing. One shot from the Paris gun cost more than maintaining an infantry company for a month, and the results were meager. Many shells fell in the suburbs or completely outside the city, burying themselves in the earth on wastelands and causing no damage except a crater in the ground. Some burst over the Seine, raising fountains of water but causing no damage. There were cases when shells fell on already destroyed buildings or in parks where no one was present. However, the political leadership of Germany under Kaiser Wilhelm II looked at the matter differently. For them, the Paris gun was a symbol of German technical might and superiority, a demonstration that German engineers were capable of creating weapons that no other nation could dream of. The very fact of bombarding an enemy capital from a distance exceeding 100 kilometers seemed a fantastic achievement worthy of admiration. The propaganda machine of the Reich actively used the image of the supergun in its materials, painting pictures of French helplessness before the German wonder weapon. German newspapers published articles about panic in Paris, about the flight of the population, about how the French government was losing control of the situation. The psychological effect was indeed significant. Parisians lived in constant fear, expecting the next blow. The impossibility of predicting where the next shell would fall created an atmosphere of general anxiety. People feared going out into the streets. Many businesses closed schools, discontinued classes. Some Parisians seriously believed that the Germans were bombarding the city from some kind of flying fortresses or invisible airships. There were rumors of secret aircraft capable of rising to incredible heights and dropping bombs. The French government was not in a hurry to dispel these rumors, since acknowledging the existence of the German supergun would have meant acknowledging its own powerlessness to find and destroy it. Meanwhile, German engineers continued improving their creation. They experimented with various types of projectiles, trying to increase their destructive power. Variants with increased explosive content were developed with fragmentation warheads, even with chemical charges containing poison gas. However, all attempts to increase the projectile's payload ran into physical limitations. The body had to be strong enough to withstand monstrous accelerations during firing and heating during flight through the stratosphere. Any weakening of the structure resulted in the projectile either breaking apart in the barrel or in flight. Several experimental shots ended in catastrophes when projectiles burst before reaching their target and their fragments fell on German-controlled territory. In the spring of 1918, German command undertook its last major offensive on the Western Front, trying to break through Allied defenses and capture Paris before American forces fully entered the war. The Paris gun was to support this offensive by placing additional pressure on the French government and the capital's population. The bombardments became more intense. Sometimes up to 10 shells were fired at the city in a day. One of the most terrible tragedies occurred on Good Friday, March 29th, when a shell hit the Church of Saint-Gervais during services. The building collapsed on the worshippers. 88 people died, including many women and children. This was the bloodiest episode in the entire history of the Paris gun's use, causing a wave of outrage throughout the world. However, the German offensive failed. Allied forces, reinforced by fresh American divisions, repelled all attacks and began a counteroffensive. By August 1918, it became clear that Germany was losing the war. German armies began retreating along the entire Western Front line, abandoning captured territory and withdrawing toward their own borders. The Paris gun was in danger of being captured by the advancing enemy. Its position was moving ever closer to the front line, and the risk of a French breakthrough was becoming real. German command decided to evacuate the precious gun to deep rear areas. The disassembly and transport of such a machine represented a grandiose operation. First, the barrel had to be removed from the carriage using powerful cranes. Then the platform itself had to be disassembled into transportable sections. All this had to be done under threat of air raids by Allied aircraft and artillery bombardment. The work was carried out primarily at night in the light of searchlights protected by camouflage screens. The crew worked at a frantic pace, understanding that every day of delay increased the danger of the gun being captured by the enemy. Finally, the Paris gun was taken apart, loaded on several railway platforms, and sent deep into Germany. The last shot at the French capital rang out on August 9, 1918. After that, the legendary gun disappeared from the combat zone forever. As German forces retreated, French intelligence intensified its search. Agents combed through positions abandoned by the Germans, hoping to find some trace of the mysterious gun. At the firing positions, they found concrete foundations, rail fragments, empty shell boxes, but the gun itself was not there. The Germans had removed all valuable equipment, leaving the enemy nothing but garbage. French engineers studied the found parts, trying to reconstruct the gun's construction, but information was extremely scarce. Several captured shells that had not exploded were examined in laboratories, but this gave only an approximate idea of the gun's characteristics. On November 11, 1918, an armistice was signed, ending the First World War. Germany capitulated, and the Allies gained the right to inspect German military facilities and seize weapons. Special commissions arrived in Germany, tasked with finding and confiscating all advanced weapons, including the famous Paris gun. The French especially insisted on obtaining this gun. They wanted not only to study its construction, but also to display it as a trophy demonstrating Germany's defeat. However, the search yielded no results. German command categorically denied the existence of any long-range guns and provided no information about their whereabouts. Allied inspectors combed through German arsenals, Krupp factories, railway depots, and military warehouses. They found vast quantities of various weapons, from rifles to heavy howitzers, but the Paris gun was nowhere to be found. Krupp factory workers claimed they had never heard of such a project. Military archives contained no drawings or documentation for long-range guns. The impression arose that the entire story of Paris's bombardment was some fantastic fiction. Though the shell craters in Paris itself and numerous victims' testimonies clearly proved otherwise. The Germans remained silent, as if they had said nothing, refusing to discuss the matter even under threat of sanctions. The most likely theory was that German command had ordered the destruction of all traces of the supergun's existence immediately after the war ended. The gun represented the pinnacle of German military engineering, and the generals did not want to allow these technologies to fall into the hands of the victors. Most likely, the barrels were cut into pieces and melted down in ordinary metallurgical plants, where they were lost among thousands of tons of other scrap metal. The carriages and platforms were disassembled and disposed of in parts. All technical documentation, drawings, calculations, and firing reports were burned or destroyed in other ways. The personnel of the gun crews received strict orders never to tell anyone about their service with the secret weapon under threat of prosecution. The Allies managed to capture only pathetic scraps of what was once a formidable weapon. In several places, spare parts, breech fragments, aiming mechanisms, pieces of armor were found. At an abandoned railway station, 3 massive platforms were found which, by their construction, could have been used to transport a super-heavy gun. These platforms were sent to France, where engineers studied them carefully, but without the gun itself, they could say little about its exact specifications. Also captured were several unused shells weighing 120 kilograms, with characteristic marks and numbers. They were disassembled and examined, providing an understanding of the shell's construction. But the mystery of the gun itself remained unsolved. French intelligence continued working, trying to find anyone from the former crew of the Paris gun. Agents interrogated demobilized German soldiers, offered money for information, even threatened prosecution for war crimes related to the bombardment of civilians. Several people agreed to give testimony for payment, but their stories were so contradictory and incomplete that verifying their reliability was impossible. Some claimed they saw a 40-meter gun installed in a giant concrete bunker. Others swore the weapon was not 1, but 3, and they fired in turn. Still others spoke of some kind of rocket projectiles with their own motors. Only one thing was clear: real information was carefully hidden, and witness testimony was a mixture of truth rumors and outright lies. Historians and military experts in the post-war years tried to reconstruct the Paris gun's characteristics based on indirect data. They analyzed shell craters, studied trajectories of hits, questioned witnesses to the bombardments. Ballistics experts performed reverse calculations, trying to determine what parameters the gun would have needed to deliver a 120-kilogram projectile 120 kilometers. The results were fantastic: a barrel length of more than 30 meters. Pressure in the barrel channel exceeding all known values. Initial projectile velocity of more than 1.5 kilometers per second. Many specialists openly doubted that such a gun could have existed from a technical standpoint. Over time, interest in the Paris gun faded. A new era began with new types of weapons. Aviation developed at rapid speeds, and soon bombers could deliver combat loads to enemy territory far exceeding a 120-kilogram shell. Why build a giant, unwieldy gun, costing millions of marks, when a few aircraft could do the same job faster, cheaper, and more effectively? The very concept of long-range artillery seemed obsolete and hopeless. The Paris gun became a historical curiosity, a technical achievement that fascinated the imagination but lacked practical meaning. Nevertheless, German military leadership did not abandon the idea of giant guns. In the interwar period, Krupp engineers continued work on super-heavy artillery. The experience gained in creating the Paris gun was not wasted. New technologies for manufacturing long barrels were developed, methods for calculating ballistic trajectories were improved, aiming systems were perfected. These achievements ultimately led to the creation during the Second World War of such monsters as the 800mm railway gun Dora and the 600mm mortar Karl. These guns were significantly more powerful than the Paris gun, but inherited from it the same inherent problems: enormous cost, low mobility, rapid barrel wear, and questionable effectiveness. Some veterans of the First World War who served in artillery claimed that the Paris gun was not the only example of long-range weaponry. According to them, the Germans developed several other similar guns of smaller caliber intended to bombard other French cities. Allegedly, there were plans for creating an entire battery of such guns that was to systematically bombard the most important industrial centers of France, paralyzing the work of military factories and transport infrastructure. However, no documentary evidence for these claims was found. Perhaps they were simply projects that remained on paper, or perhaps more wartime legends that accumulated speculations over the years.